Hello YouTube. In my research of paranormal phenomena, I have encountered very strange cases. I found out about very unusual groups who visit very unusual encounters and most interesting cases, and we know very little about them. It's like there is a force out there who knows more than we do, and they're humans, but we know nothing about them, where they come from, how they operate, but they're definitely interested. So I want to talk to you today about the Tunguska phenomenon. I've studied it for years, and the more I do my research, the more questions come about. I'm sure most of you know the basic story. It happened on June 30, 1908 at 7:17 a.m. And this was perhaps the most famous Russian UFO case of the early 20th century. When something exploded over Siberia on June 30, it flattened more than 2,100 square kilometers of forest, left no craters and no obvious fragments. So what exactly was it that visited Siberia and our planet in 1908? See, this question has been on the minds of Russian scientists, researchers, ufologists since at least from the 1920s. Some of those who had studied this phenomenon died in concentration camps, some perished during their search in TAIGA, some were ostracized, forgotten, crushed by bloody history of the 20th century Russia. There are conflicting reports about the occurrence, even regarding the direction of the objects or several objects, flight or flights. There are conflicting opinions whether it was an object or something else, or even if the visitor was what could be described as a physical object. Yes, we, serious researchers, have reports from various witnesses. We have learned about subsequent mutations and the ecological impact of the explosion, but I just call it that for the convenience. We read a number of hypotheses, and yet the most important event of Russia's UFO history is still not even close to being solved. In my books, I have attempted to present all points of view and piece together scattered fragments of the ongoing quest to solve the mystery of the Tunguska explosion. But you need to know something about this area. The Tunguska is a vast area. It remains a wilderness even today, full of mosquito-infested swamps and marshes. The surrounding taiga or boreal forest is, however, a most beautiful sight, but the journey to the area usually is a living hell. It's a little bit more comfortable today, of course, than it was 100 years ago. Now, a few words, I want to talk about the native population. In my videos, I want to bring up as much about indigenous populations of former Russian Empire and USSR as much as possible, because they have been decimated. So I want to talk about them. Now, the Event nomadic indigenous nation was formed by mixing of local ancient eastern Siberian population with the Tungus tribes, arriving from the Baikal Lake area about 1000 AD. Once before, the Events were most numerous people in Siberia. The Events, they lived in taiga, which extends from river Irtysh to the Sea of Okhotsk, including the territories of the river Lena, river Angara, and Lake Baikal. And I mention those territories because if you look at other videos in my channel, you will see other interesting phenomena that has taken place there. Paleo contact, ancient aliens, and so forth. And I urge you to study more, look at my videos, because I'm trying to give you the panorama of paranormal Russia. Not only Russia, but in this case we're talking about Russia itself. These Events, they were hunters, reindeer herders, and fishermen. Now, currently the Event population numbers, I would say, about 2,000, maybe 3,000 people at most. Like I said, I will give you some details about this event, but I do want to mention, from my research, I've read a number of reports from Pesach Amnuel. He's an Israeli astrophysicist and a writer. He is of Soviet Jewish origin. And he studied this phenomena quite extensively. And he mentioned that the year 1908 experienced an upsurge in solar activity. Just good to remember. Now let's talk about the event itself for a bit. The object approached from an azimuth of 115 degrees and descended at an entry angle of 30 to 35 degrees above the horizon. It continued along a northwestward trajectory until it seemingly disappeared over the horizon. When the object reached altitude of 2.5 to 9.0 kilometers over the area, an explosion-like energy release occurred. Trees burned for weeks, destroying an area of about 1,000 square kilometers. Ash was carried by global air circulation around the planet. The mass of the object has been estimated to be 100,000 tons, and the force of the explosion at 40 megatons of TNT, 2 times the force of the atomic bomb that exploded over Hiroshima, Japan in 1945. So there have been a number of expeditions, and I'll talk about some of them. Something you have not heard about, really. And I want you to remember that according to an old legend, among those who have gone to TAIGA, to the Tunguska TAIGA in search of the answers to the mystery of this phenomenon, they who enter the area leave there a piece of themselves. That's what the legend says. However, they also acquire some specific spirit, a special essence that accompanies them for the rest of their life. This spirit forces them to go back, time after time. I want to talk now about Makarenko's expedition. There is a very knowledgeable author, scientist in Ukraine, Alexander Kulsky, who once published a very interesting book in 1997 in Kiev, where I am from. The title of the book is At the Crossroads of the Universe. Kulsky was able to collect a great deal of interesting and usually previously unavailable information about the paranormal phenomena in the Tsarist Russia, USSR, Eastern and Western Europe. Among such materials, there is a brochure written by Wojciechowski, somebody named Wojciechowski. Apparently, at the end of June of 1908, a Russian scientific expedition led by Makarenko, who worked in the area of Katonga. That's the local Evenki name for Podkamennaya Tunguska River, or open water. That's what Katonga means. And now, a brief report about the expedition's work was prepared by this Makarenko. He was a member of the Geographic Society, and then this report was discovered later by Wojciechowski. The report, Makarenko report, stated that the photographs of the Katonga were taken, its depths and navigating channel measured, etc. But there was no mention of any phenomena that would be associated with, let's say, meteorite's fall. This is one of the strangest episodes of the Tunguska phenomenon. Russian scientists of the pre-revolutionary Russia were educated to no less a degree than their European neighbors. The Geographic Society was a prestigious group of science luminaries. Its members would not miss scientific data, observations and measurements. So how could scientists miss an event like Tunguska explosion or whatever else occurred on that day, or not report it even in a brief account of their expedition? They were at the site of the event at the time of the event. Kulsky has two explanations. Either the report was later changed for reasons we cannot comprehend, or the members of the expedition did not observe anything because their minds were, well, let's call it, turned off. So they would not be able to observe anything. Look, whatever faults could be attributed to Tsarist Russia, totalitarian secrecy certainly was not one of them. This came later when socialism was brought to my country. The press reported anomalous phenomena quite openly. What would the expedition have to observe in the taiga that day in order to force authorities to confiscate its diaries and change Makarenko's report for another one, where the Tunguska phenomenon is not mentioned at all? The Ukrainian author Kursky accepts the second explanation. The expedition's members had their consciousness turned off by artificial means. However improbable this may sound, there were other strange events related to the expeditions to the taiga. According to Wojciechowski's materials, the very first expedition actually dispatched to the site as the result of the occurrence of the Tunguska phenomenon and the need to research it. That first expedition, according to Wojciechowski, was organized in 1911. The expedition was sent by the Omsk Department of Highways and Waterways. No other than Vyacheslav Shishkov, at the time an engineer and much later a famous novelist, headed that expedition. His book Ugrum Reka, or Gloomy River, was a bestseller in the 1960s USSR and contained very interesting descriptions of the daily life in the taiga, as well as its inhabitants. I know, I've read that book many times, and you find a lot of information that usually should not be even published in the Soviet Union and in its pages. Some paranormal episodes about life in the taiga are also found on the pages of that book. A Soviet motion picture based on the book was produced in 1969. I saw it too, and I believe in modern Russia they're going to make a series based on that book, and I really welcome it. And if you can read it in English, do. I think the book was translated. Now, this is not the end of it. We don't know much about the Shishkov's expedition, but there is something else. There was still another expedition to the site. Some old-timers in the taiga, some obscure articles in the newspapers of the time, and recollections of the pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg scientist reveal scattered details. All that is known today is that a group of people with unusual equipment visited the alleged crash site of the Tunguska phenomenon and observed incredible phenomena at the site. This was sometime in 1909 or 1910. But who those people were, what their equipment consisted of, we have no knowledge whatsoever. It is important to mention here that the Far Eastern UFO researchers from Vladivostok, who embarked on their 1991 expedition to find the Devil's Cemetery, this was the alleged exact site of the Tunguska phenomenon's body's crash in the taiga. Those researchers collected persistent reports of strange animals and humans in the area after 1908. Please look at my video about the Devil's Cemetery expedition. I knew those people. I was in touch with them back in 1991 for a number of years. Very capable researchers, and they did find very unusual things. I think you will like it. But we need to get back to yet another expedition. I found out about it from Valentin Psalomshikov. He was a noted, still is, Russian scientist and journalist, and he published his findings in 1999. He researched information about a secret Soviet military expedition sanctioned by Lavrenti Beria. He was a Soviet statesman and at the time a member of the Politburo. This chief of dreaded Soviet secret police was placed in charge of the Soviet atomic weapons project in the late 1940s. The expedition took place 1 year after the testing of the first Soviet atomic bomb. In the summer of 1949, Beria presented his ideas during a high-level secret meeting. He wanted to study the area of the Tunguska phenomenon, but he was not interested in looking for a meteorite. If there was an explosion of a nuclear-powered spaceship over the Siberian taiga, Beria wanted detailed information about it. Now, the idea of this alien spaceship blowing over the taiga belongs to Alexander Kazantsev, who was the Soviet science fiction writer, but also a military director of a military plant, very interesting personality. And many of his ideas were later circulated in the West, should I say borrowed, by other researchers of ancient civilizations. Kazantsev was a very interesting person, and actually he helped give impetus to UFO research in the USSR as well. Maybe indirectly, but that's another story. So, when the Beria expedition took place, Kazantsev's name was not mentioned. And Beria ruled against participation of civilian scientists in the expedition, but demanded experts in the field of atomic tests and ballistics experts. See, Beria suspected that an alien spaceship did explode over the taiga. This is what my understanding is. So it had to go even above him to Stalin. But anyway, before the expedition left for the taiga, Beria demanded his assistance to collect all information about the geophysical effects of the explosion. Then, with great care, readings of devices of Russian and German meteorological stations from June 30, 1908 were analyzed and researched. This project confirmed that the airwave caused by the explosion circled the Earth several times. It became clear that the energy produced by the explosion was several dozen megatons, and the explosion occurred at the altitude of 20 kilometers. Information received from the Irkutsk Geophysical Observatory was also confirmed. Intensive disturbance of the Earth's magnetic field, recorded several minutes after the explosion, were like those effects that are caused by increased ionization in the epicenter and accompany powerful nuclear explosions in the atmosphere. The Irkutsk scientists at the time of the explosion were also able to receive waves from Europe, something that had never occurred before. Even before Beria expedition left for the taiga, a reconnaissance airplane twice flew over the area of the alleged meteorite's fall and took photographs of the forest at different altitudes. Each member of the expedition read Kulik's reports and saw the photographs he took. Kulik was the first Soviet scientist who researched the Tunguska phenomenon, and I'll talk about him, his findings, and his life in another video. And so, in the summer of 1949, members of the secret military expedition, disguised as geologists, were flown to the Vanavara settlement, and then a hydroplane flew them in turn to the Cheko Lake. That's a small freshwater lake in Siberia, near the Podkamina Tunguska River. They were prohibited from asking questions of local residents, but they were allowed to listen. This is very unusual, but this is exactly what we know. Scientific findings of the expedition were never published. They were different from those of the expeditions later sent to the area by the Soviet Science Academy and Committee for the Study of Meteorites. Beria's military scientists established that the trees were felled by percussion wave, that is, from the Tunguska phenomenon's inner energy, and not by a ballistic wave of a flying object. Hence, the explosion did occur at a high altitude. Even by most modest calculations, the force of the explosion was over 1 megaton, but there was no radiation of any significance in the area. After an atomic bomb explodes, there is substantial radioactive presence in the atmosphere. So, concluded military scientists, it had to be a thermonuclear explosion. Upon their return to Moscow, the scientists in charge of different field research groups, ballistics, radioactivity, etc., they prepared their reports. They were isolated in different rooms with typewriters and paper. Then Beria's officials collected the completed reports. There were no discussions, no brainstorming. We still do not know what happened to the reports of the secret military expedition. I want you to remember, in my videos I present more than once the account of Sergei Korolev, he was the father of Soviet space science, meeting with Stalin about the same time in Kremlin. Other scientists were invited to give their opinions as to the essence of UFOs and whether they present threat to the Soviet Union. I thank you for listening to my videos, for watching them. If you can support my research, please do. There are links and in the introduction section, and I will bring you more information about paranormal Eurasia. Thank you.